Welcome back to the Persistence Project. We've been on a little break due to illness, but we're back again and I'm excited for today's conversation. This podcast is all about strength training from mindset to max effort, and I love talking to other coaches, athletes and practitioners within the strength space about why they do what they do and how they do what they do. As always, this podcast is brought to you by my awesome sponsors, Jacked and Juiced Apparel, who provide awesome training apparel for lifting heavy weights, and East Coast Supplements in Dubbo for all your supplement needs and a no bullshit approach to advice around supplementation. And a new sponsor has come on board, Hunter Performance Physio. If you're local to the Hunter area, Hunter Performance Physio are one of the best physios you'll find, particularly for lifters. So if you're local and you're watching this or listening to this, check them out. Tim and Ryan are the best in the business. So, and I wanted to give a special shout out to my friends in Death Row who provide the music for the intro to this podcast. They've just put out a new EP called 214 in the 4215, which is as gangster as it sounds. If you like heavy music, go check them out. They're an awesome band, one of the best up-and-coming hardcore bands in Australia, and great for lifting heavy weights too. So today on the podcast, we have Macauley Tinker. He is a strongman, two-time third strongest man in Australia at Australia's Strongest Man. He has competed at a high level nationally and internationally. He's a strongman coach at J-Train Athletic Performance in Brookvale, New South Wales. He also coaches some general population clients, but mainly as a strongman coach. And he also performs or competes in the Highland Games and numerous other strength sports. Macauley, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's awesome to have you on here. I think this is one of the ones that people have been excited for since I had Chris on and I said, Macaulay's coming on soon.
Yeah.
And because we're both extremely busy, it's been a little while in the process, but we're getting there. We got there. We did get here, finally. It's awesome to have you. Thanks for coming up.
No, thank you.
So, strongman, athlete, you're at a very high level now. What did it look like when you first got into the gym? Like, was that when you were younger or did you get straight into strength training?
Yeah. How it started, I suppose, was when I was a teenager, starting out with strength training. Although I was always kind of fascinated by strength and physical culture. As a child, like, when I was 4 or 5 years old, some of my earliest memories were actually my uncle. He used to be with the military, and when he'd come over and visit, like, this guy was like hanging off the rafters from the ceiling, just like banging out chin-ups like you wouldn't believe, and pumping out push-ups on his knuckles, and then he'd go out for a K run or whatever and be back, and he's doing sit-ups, he's doing push-ups, and I just thought he was the coolest guy. So growing up, I was always on my knuckles, pumping out sets of push-ups and whatnot. And as I kind of went through school, I was always involved in sports. I was always playing club footy, and I was involved with squad swimming, and other bits and pieces. I was always active in school carnivals, and I'd kind of get involved with anything. I could run, I could throw, I could kind of dabble in anything. But it wasn't until I was a teenager, kind of around, I suppose, like 15, maybe 14, 15, somewhere in there, actually started at the local youth centre, because there was some weights down there. So me and the boys used to go poke around and, hammer some bench press, not knowing what we were doing, and hammer out some bicep curls and chest flies. That's kind of where it began. And that progressed into joining my first commercial gym. I was a member of an Anytime Fitness gym, and same thing, just hammering bicep curls and chest flies and these kind of thing. So I didn't start with like a super strong base is kind of what I'm trying to get across. I wasn't one of these boys who kind of crashes into the scenes, and we've all heard of them. Boys like Alex Simon, and even one of the boys I was overseas with recently, Andy Black. These kind of guys walked into a gym their first time ever and deadlifted 250, 260 kilos. Yeah. That wasn't me, but I was still in the gym. I remember one of the first milestones I hit was when I bulked up to 100 kilos. And I thought that was the coolest thing.
Yeah.
and it kind of just progressed from there. I suppose in those infancy stages of the lifting career, the focus was definitely to, look strong and pick up chicks.
Yeah.
Like that was number one.
Yeah.
But as, I kind of went through that phase and got over the aesthetic metric of lifting, I started looking online and was kind of captivated by some athletes in the weightlifting game. Mikhail Koklayev and Dmitry Klokov, like these foreign athletes who were just powerhouses on YouTube, really kind of sparked my interest. So I suppose like the first kind of introduction into strength sports I had was when I joined a weightlifting club. And this would have been like 2016. Yeah. 2016, when I was kind of early 20s, I joined Triumph Weightlifting Club, which was attached to the back of a CrossFit space on the Northern Beaches. Yeah. And that's kind of where I first learnt, snatching and clean and jerks, which had my attention and, I fell in love with. But I kind of fast forwarded in my mind and I thought, am I really going to just snatch and clean and jerk forever, if this is something that I want to do, and kind of leaning into that point, there was something inside me that was telling me to do something amazing.
So what were you doing in your early 20s? Like
bicep curls and drinking beers.
Yeah. you know, at uni or like working, or what were you doing?
No, I was working. Yeah. I joined the workforce fairly early. I finished school early. I was young for my year, so I wrapped up school at 16, and started working a job. My first job was in a factory working a joinery job. So
through that whole process, did you find that you were doing these jobs and they weren't really satisfying that desire or that passion? They weren't filling you with joy to do.
Yeah.
So that kind of looking for something in weightlifting was kind of like, there's something more that I'm trying to explore here.
Absolutely.
You're searching for?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think the only real commitment I had in my life in that time was partying.
Yeah.
that was the only real thing I was kind of focused on. But I knew that there was something more than spending all my time, effort, energy, and money poking around pubs and clubs. So I wanted something greater, and it was strength that grabbed my attention.
Yeah.
And it was strength that I kind of aligned myself with. I had no right to do so, mind you. I had dabbled doing push-ups as a kid and, collecting ribbons at the school carnival for, shot put in 100-meter dashes. But I was by no means a champion. You know what I mean? I had no right to believe that I could kind of cultivate this champion character that I wanted to develop in myself. Yeah. But there was something burning in there. There was something burning, and to your point, I wasn't finding it anywhere else.
Yeah, it's interesting because what's interesting is that you didn't feel like you had the right to kind of assume that you could be great at something, even though that kind of is inherently in itself the right. Like if you want to be great, you have to believe that you can be great. You don't have to necessarily be great off the bat. And most of the great people have fought pretty hard for it. So I think that I don't think anyone has a right to strength. It's just like, or I should rephrase it, everyone has a right to strength because that's kind of how you function as in a healthy life. If you want to live a long life, you can be strong when you're younger, you're probably going to live longer. So everyone should find that. And to find that in your early 20s is pretty good.
Yeah.
So when you joined the weightlifting club, and you kind of got to that point where you were like, oh, well, snatches and clean and jerks, that's not doing it either. How good did you get at weightlifting? Did you compete at all?
No. It was I was very surface level weightlifter. I think at that stage I'd only snatched maybe 100 and maybe a clean and jerk of 120, surface level weightlifting. And that's kind of when I realized that I wanted be great and I wanted to do something amazing. I knew that. I was under no illusion that that was going to take a long period of time. And all I knew was that I was willing to commit, but I wanted to know that I was committing myself to the right path. So in this contemplative stage of, you know, where I was going to commit my energy, weightlifting didn't do it because I didn't want to snatch and clean and jerk for the rest of my life. So we looked around at kind of the family tree of strength sports, you know, and it's a fairly close-knit family tree. From weightlifting, I looked out the back and saw what the CrossFitters are doing. I thought, nah, not really my thing. I figured powerlifting, you know, is in there at this stage, but it was a very similar field to weightlifting in that I was only ever going to commit to doing squat, bench, and deadlift for the rest of my journey of greatness. So I sacked that. Bodybuilding was on the cards as well, but I figured that's just not me. That's not my style. You know, again, I kind of moved on from that that aesthetic metric. So I wasn't too fussed on getting up on stage in trunks or whatever and nailing a posing routine. That wasn't like speaking to me. But it was this time I actually went and found another gym locally, and it was called, I forget the bloke's name now, but it was such and such's Extreme Gym. And he had this, it was cool, man. He had this little dungeon gym in Brookie. And, you know, I even remember the logo, the sign writing for, you know, the Extreme Gym. And it was him there hitting this like double by with this big tire. And we'd go in there and, you know, the training was super simple. It was, you know, if we were doing back or pressing or legs or whatever, there'd be like 3 exercises set up where we just hammer out like max effort sets of 10. And then once we'd completed 3 rounds of that, we just do tire flips and farmer carries. And he had this huge battle rope, but it wasn't a battle rope. It was actually it was a rope that was used to moor boats in the harbor, like the whatever boats that come through, those big cruise liners. And you know, they were impossibly heavy, and we'd try and slam them for the session, and that kind of training he advertised was strongman training, and that was it. That was the kind of like, that was something flicked. I was like, strongman, that's a thing. That's we have weightlifting and bodybuilding, powerlifting, strongman. Isn't that the thing where they like lift stones and pull trucks and whatever else? And that sent me down the rabbit hole. I jumped online and I started absorbing information from some coaches such as Alan Thrall. He was a big inspiration to me in the early days. And there was another bloke called Brian Allsrue. He owned a gym called Never Sate Athletics. And these guys were kind of I suppose like the devil or the angel on my shoulder. And they were feeding me this information about strongman. And there was this one message that kept coming through. And it was, you know, just find a local competition and enter. Just find a local competition and enter. And you know, at this stage, I still wasn't strong at all. I think I would have maxed out a deadlift at around 200 kilos or something, and I was clean and pressing 3/10 of fuck all overhead. And I found my way to my first local competition. Had no idea what I was signing myself up for. No idea about the events. It happened to be a static monsters competition. So the static monsters competition is it's like a world games where gyms all over the world will sign up to host the static monsters competition, and it's similar to weightlifting or powerlifting. It's 3 attempts at both a log clean and press and then an 18-inch axle deadlift. So I've rocked up there, and I think I'd touched a log once. I'd found an 8-inch log somewhere and pressed it overhead once before, and I think I pressed that day 100 kilos or 110 kilos overhead. And then I did an 18-inch deadlift at 250 kilos. I've still got the certificate. It was November 2016, and I weighed 121 kilos, thinking I was pretty strong, and I was ready for strongman. And there was this one dude, I forget his name, and he's since left the sport, but he rocked up with an opening deadlift of 400, which was bigger than my total for the day. And then he went on to attempt 450, and he was this huge dude. He was so muscular, it was crazy. And someone had told me that he had this torn hamstring, and so he had this wrap, like a knee wrap that was just like tethered around his entire quad, like his entire leg, and he just strapped it as tight as he could to preserve his hamstring. And I was like, oh, this is strongman. And I placed last in that competition, like dead last, and fell in love. You know, I was completely hooked. So that's kind of, I suppose, the origins of that.
I think that kind of, there's two kind of roads in the origin stories of people. Like, you either got humbled, like you went and you knew, you know, I'm not particularly strong, but I'm feeling pretty good about myself, and then you just have that happen. 400 kilo deadlift, and you're just like, Jesus Christ, like, well, I'm never going to be that. Or you look at it and go, holy shit, I'm going to be that.
Oh yeah.
Or the other side of the coin, you get the people who come in who are strong, genetically strong, and think they're God's gift of strength at their first comp, and it's like, take a step back.
The outliers.
The outlier, yeah. You are an outlier. You have to recognise that.
Yep.
But obviously people like that go on to do well if they stick with it. But I think one of the interesting things you said in there is that you knew very early on that it was a long process. Is that something you just picked up on through that, or is it something that you heard people say, or like, because not everyone really comes into sports, strength sports, and goes, hey, I'm going to commit to, like, this is a 10, 15-year journey. Yep. And I'm committed to it.
Yep. And that's really what I committed to. You know, 2016, 8 years ago, I would have been 23 years old.
Yep.
No idea about strongman, or I couldn't comprehend the Australian community. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know anything. But I figured, if I'm going to commit to this, I'm going to, set a goal, and it's going to have it's going to be attached to a time frame. And I said, I'm going to be Australia's strongest man by the time I'm 30, not knowing what I was getting myself into. But I still knew that it would take time. I suppose, maybe growing up and watching athletes of other fields, coming through swimming or footy or whatever, maybe I just had an understanding of, of the time that it might take to achieve, something great. I don't know. But that being said, I think I see more often than not now that boys and girls, people, want to come into the game and they want to be great now. Yeah. They don't want to be the best in 8-10 years. Yeah. They want to know, what's the record right now? Who's pulling 400? Who's pulling 450? Because I'm doing it this year. Yeah. And it's not realistic. No. I've seen a lot of guys come through this sport a lot of strong guys, a lot of guys with some serious potential that have just burnt themselves out and flown way too close to the sun, way too early, and where are they now? Couldn't tell you. Yeah. They just didn't have that realistic time frame in mind. Yeah,
I think powerlifting is obviously my world more so than strongman, as I'm not a competitive strongman. I do coach it, but that I watch that in both worlds of strength sports. It's like, where does that illusion come from? I gather social media, the prevalence of people on Instagram coming out of nowhere with 500 kilo deadlifts or 400 kilo deadlifts, and everyone's like, wow, I could do that. That illusion seems so prevalent within the sport. It's like, I don't know how anyone thought that. Like, when I got into it, the people that I looked to talked about it being a long-term process. I'm like, oh, okay, right, maybe by the time I'm 50, I'll be strong because I got into it later, But I was the same, I know this is going to take a while, and I came second last in my first comp. It's kind of like, oh well, I'll come first one day.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So many people come in and they're like, oh, I'm not going to do a comp unless I win.
Yeah.
What's the point?
Yeah.
And it's like, because you got to learn how to compete.
100%. And coming back to outliers and people who do come into the game and just start dominating, almost immediately. These people are, truly the sub 1% of people. Yeah. You know what I mean?
1% of the 1%.
You're 1% of the 1%. So the probability of us, you, me, people being an outlier is already so incredibly low. But these outliers, they usually have something in common. They usually have a background of athleticism. They've come from somewhere. They haven't just got off the couch and gone, I reckon I could have a crack at that, and been this incredible athlete. Yeah. And I'm going to use someone for an example. Mitch Hooper. He was 2023 world's strongest man. he came into our sport seemingly out of nowhere and competed in a local contest. He won, didn't know who he was, no one knew who he was.
Yeah.
Great. He actually came and competed against me, I think in October of 2022. Didn't know who he was. I actually beat him at that competition in the max log. I think he just hit 140 by the skin of his teeth, and I went out there and pressed 150 and beat him. But he beat me overall by half a point, bastard. But he then went on to win New South Wales Strongest Man, and then kind of cracked into the world scene, got into World's Strongest Man, top 10 in his rookie year, went on to win World's Strongest Man the next year. Like, unheard of, doesn't happen. Yeah. But what was it about that guy? He came from growing up in sports, doing well. I believe it was American football and ice hockey, I think he came from. But then he also had some really, really interesting times in bodybuilding, I believe, natural bodybuilding, looks like natural bodybuilding from the photos that he's put up, marathon running, so he had this huge motor on him, then went into powerlifting. I think in the Australian scene, he was an under 120 kilo powerlifter, and not by any means like the strongest dude we've ever heard of. I think, back then maybe it was APU, I think he was competing with. I think he was squatting somewhere under 300, maybe like 290, 280, somewhere up there. Yeah. Bench press of, 170 or something. But he had this deadlift on him that was about 360 kilos. A fairly strong dude, but, you wouldn't pick him to be the world's strongest man. But he had all of this experience. So when he came into Strongman with, the work capacity that he developed from, powerlifting and these team sports, with this aerobic capacity he developed for marathon running, and you just translated that over into Strongman, it was inevitable. He was always going to become a great champion if he knew that he was going to play the long game and he was going to commit to being the best. And lo and behold.
Well, if you take that base that he's built and all those kind of different expressions of strength and endurance, and then funnel it into a direction that he's just got, like, because he kind of went, okay, well, I'm good at this, I like this, right, full steam ahead in one direction, but he's got this massive base of the pyramid to draw on. So of course he's going to, like, if he's coming from American football and ice hockey and stuff, then being in the weight room's probably something he's done since he was a teenager. And you find that those are the people, if you're generally athletic and you've got a base of muscular strength and some endurance, and you're going to do well in Strongman. So what did your second competition look like?
Second competition was, so from getting smoked at Static Monsters, the guys, I don't know if they took pity on me or what, but they guided me in the direction of novice strongman competitions. Real grassroots strongman competitions. 5 events per competition. You'd go in and you'd compete against guys with a similar amount of experience to you. So I did a couple of those, which then I did well at. At the grassroots level, I think I won 2 or 3 competitions. And, I was like, okay, well, maybe we're onto something. I might not be able to go up against old big nuts pulling 400, 450 kilos, but guys of a similar level, I can do fairly well. From there, I started to get involved in, I suppose, like the intermediate scene. Once you finished up with your novice era, you're expected to kind of move up and try to get a qualification for one of the bigger ticket shows. Something like New South Wales Strongest Man, or back then we still had the Arnold series, so we still had the Australian Arnold leg. So I was expected to kind of go and pick a competition to compete and qualify to go to those big shows. So I did that. Qualified for the Arnold, the Australian Amateur Strongman Championships in Melbourne in 2018. So I went and did that. Got flogged. That was against more competitive boys that were trying to crack it at the national level and start competing overseas. So I still had a lot of work to do. I actually competed there in, I think, 2018 and 2019, and both years placed 9th. So wasn't really getting better, but wasn't really getting any worse. And from there, started to crack into New South Wales Strongest Man, which I ended up winning. Started to compete at Australia's Strongest Man, which I did well at the last 2 years in a row, taking 3rd in both years, 23, 24. and then started kind of
A little more than well. That's pretty damn good.
it's all right. It's getting there.
Yeah,
you
I
know,
know it's not number one. You want
it's
number
not.
one,
It's not number one. You know, the goal was to be Australia's strongest man by the time I was 30.
Yeah.
And that goal still hasn't changed. I didn't meet the target, so it doesn't mean I just throw my toys out of the pram and I will sack this. I'll go and play table tennis or something. It just means that I'm not done.
Yeah.
I'm not done until I say so. So it's been a wild ride.
Yeah.
We're getting there. I feel like we're getting closer.
Yeah, well, the consistency's there, and the drive's there. I think that like when you make those kind of plans, I want to do this by a certain time. The goalposts just kind of shift because
Totally.
you're like, well, no, I love this.
Totally.
So I'm not stopping because I didn't meet it, like you said. I'm not going to spit the dummy and just go, well, I'm done.
Yep.
Like, no, well, let's just
Absolutely
keep
not.
going.
Yeah. Yep.
So
100%.
you've competed. How many? I've seen your trophies. If anyone follows you on Instagram, every time you win a trophy, you film yourself putting it on your little bookshelf that is chock-a-block.
Yeah, she's running out of room on that one.
Yeah, you might need a bigger bookshelf.
Yeah.
How many comps have you done?
So I competed over the weekend.
Yep.
And I believe that was my 54th competition in strength sports.
Yeah.
So most of those have been in Strongman.
Yep.
Many of those have been in Highland Games and Highlander competitions. And back in the day, would have been 2017, maybe early 2018. I actually did a push-pull powerlifting contest, which was fun. So yeah, 50. I think the running total is 54.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's a few.
So what's the difference between Highland Games and Highlander?
So that's a really good question. I suppose the best way to explain it is Highland Games isn't even Highland Games. So what we know as the Highland Games, which is the Scottish throwing sport, is actually what is actually called the heavy events of a Highland Games.
Yeah.
So a Highland Games is more of like a festival where you'll have marching pipe bands, and you'll have Highland dances, and then you'll have the athletes come through who perform in the heavy events. So that is lightweight for distance, heavyweight for distance, light hammer, heavy Scottish hammer. It is stone put, usually a light and a heavy variation. You then have the caber toss, you have the sheaf toss, and you have the weight over bar. Those events make the heavy events of a Highland Games. Highlander is a little bit different. Highlander is kind of a hybrid between strongman and heavy events.
Okay.
So typically we'll see there'll be some kind of throwing events. Last year at the National Highlander Championships, we had a stone put. So it's very similar to a shot put. However, we use a local stone. I think this one was somewhere around 20 pounds. There was a keg toss, so there was 5 kegs that had to be flung over it was about 4 meter high bar for time. There was a caber toss. There was a Husserfeld style front carry, so it was a big sandstone that we had to pick and carry for max distance. And the final event was a natural stone loading series. So there was 5 or 6 stones. These aren't atlas stones; they're just naturally formed stones that had to be picked off the floor and loaded upon these big whiskey barrels in a sequence. So Highlander is kind of that crossover between both sports and makes its own unique flavor, which I love.
Yeah, okay. As someone who I have like a pretty close lineage to Scotland, my mum was born there, and I've always been fascinated with Scottish heritage because it's like my mum came from Scotland. So like for a very young age, I was like had bagpipe.
Oh, no way.
Didn't play bagpipes. I had tapes of bagpipes.
Oh,
I was
wow.
like really into it.
Yeah, cool.
Really interested in I've even written an album about my Scottish heritage. with
Really?
One of my mates.
No way.
And it's all about like our family histories and war and stuff like that.
How good.
So the heavy events at a Highland Games is something that actually interests me outside of powerlifting. I do want to do that one day. But
No way.
I didn't know the difference between Highlander and then heavy events.
So there you go.
Games. So it's just commonly referred to as the Highland Games, whereas that is the actual Scottish Heritage Festival.
It's kind of, you know, even I'll you know, if I'm sharing content on social media, I'll even just refer to it as Highland Games, because that's kind of how it's known and received by like the wider public. You know, if I said something to the tune of, oh, you know, competing in heavy events, it almost seems a little bit unclear if you're not really sure of the culture or the space.
Yeah. Whereas if you say Highland, it's just like short form.
Yeah.
You cut out all this explanation.
People know that you wear kilts and you throw the caber.
Do you have Scottish heritage, or is it just something that you kind of came across?
Yeah, so my great grandfather is part Scottish, and I believe his clan was the Trevartha clan. So there's Scottish heritage in my lineage, which is exciting.
There you go. What do you know? What part of Scotland?
Oh, couldn't tell you. Couldn't tell you that. No, that's that's beyond me. But definitely worth looking into. Yeah,
because we had such a, like, my nan was alive for much of my life up until I was my first son was born, so 30, in my early 30s, and she was obviously grown up in Scotland, so we knew a lot about it, and her sister and stuff. So we had this very distinct tie to the old country. Like, we know our family tartan and had that all around, and it was it's all very interesting.
But you would love the games. You would. I'd love to introduce you if you're ever keen to come and throw. I can kind of show you what I know, and because you would love it, man. There's something really special about these Celtic gatherings and the Highland Games that we have here in Australia. When you hear those pipes going off in the morning, it gives you chills, and they play all day, and man, they're my favorite days out of the year. So if you're ever keen, I'd love to show you and get you out in the kilt and get you throwing.
I have Kalina.
Yes.
And Tim
at
our gym at Hunter Strength, who both are very active in the Highland Games as well. So I've talked to them about it, and I'm definitely keen to do it. Just got to.
Kalina is she's a terrific Highland athlete. I believe she still holds records in the Australian scene. I believe for heavy hammer.
Yep.
That girl can throw a hammer, man. She can launch a Scottish hammer into orbit.
That does not surprise me.
Yeah.
Given how strong she is.
Yes.
Given she has, one of the biggest squats in female powerlifting.
Yeah, she takes to it like a duck to water. She's awesome to watch. And Tim is also fairly talented. Excuse me. But I refer to him as windmill when we're out throwing, because we did a games together, maybe last year, the year before, out in Gosford, and one of the events is the heavyweight for distance. Yep. So we have a 56 pound. Everything is pounds and feet and inches in the Highlander. We have the 56 pound weight, which we have to throw as far as we can, and kind of. The most efficient method is to rotate, kind of similarly to how discus throwers rotate, or hammer throwers in the Olympics. They rotate before they fire off their implements. That's generally considered the most efficient method for throwing, but it's tough because swinging around 56 pounds or 25 kilos around on the spot and then launching it is if you don't get your timing right, it pulls you around. So anyway, we were doing heavyweight and he was struggling, and I said, mate, just wind it up like a windmill and throw it, and he did. He's winding this 56 pound up this weight round and round and launching out into the field, mate. It was cracker. It was cracker. He's a good bloke, windmill.
I am training with him this afternoon.
Oh, you're kidding?
We do our heavy squat sessions because we're all prepping at the moment for comps. So Tuesdays is our squat day.
Good.
So I'll refer to him as windmill and see if he.
Make sure you remind him. It's good.
I like it. He's good value, Tim, and he's an avid listener of the podcast. So when this comes out, he'll be stoked to be mentioned in such.
Hey, windmill.
So Highland Games, you've done quite a few of them.
Yep.
Yeah. How often are they?
So they're kind of intermittently around the calendar. Strongman is still my main mission.
Yeah.
So, Highland Games is my side mission.
Yeah.
So this year, unfortunately, there's been a lot of just how it kind of goes. There's been a lot of clashes, and I haven't been able to go and compete at some of my favorite Highland Games events. Namely Bundanoon. Bundanoon is the biggest Highland Games event on the calendar in Australia. That one was it was a week before Australia's Strongest Man. Now I don't mind competing regularly at all, but again, the main mission had to take precedence, and I couldn't go and do Bundanoon. It actually ended up being washed out this year, which was unfortunate. But that's an amazing show to do because they have the throwing and they have the Bundanoon stones, which is this amazing set of hand carved sandstone atlas stones there's 5 of them. I believe they're from 120 kilos to 165 kilos, and we've had some amazing names from all around the world in the strongman scene come to Australia and lift these stones. But Bundanoon was back in March, April. Then we had the Aberdeen was this weekend just gone, which again, it's a massive games, but that was on the same day as my Australia's Strongest Man qualifying round.
Yep.
So obviously couldn't be in 2 places at once.
Yep.
And the Canberra Gathering, which is in October this year, I believe, is the same thing. It's the same date as the Sydney Fitness Expo, where I'll be competing for a spot to qualify to the Ohio Arnold. Yep. So outside of the big shows, I'm trying to get involved with as many other contests as I can because I just love it. Yep. Highland Games is all of the fun of strongman, none of the stress. And it's cool because it's this really cool community where where sledging is completely encouraged. But in strongman, you would never. You know what I mean. Like if Windmill has a shit throw, or if I have a shit throw out at a heavy events, he'll let me know about it, and we would to each other. But in strongman, if one of the boys makes an error, you don't rejoice and you don't sledge. It's absolutely. It's respectful like that.
Do you to go on a slight tangent? Do you find that it still exists, a bit of sledging in strongman, or is it really just non-existent? Because I've heard some stories, particularly in the female scene. There's a bit of it. There's a few personalities that are a bit like that. I don't want to cast judgment because people compete differently, and certainly in powerlifting, there's a bit of that going on. People play a lot of mind games.
Yeah, I think it depends who you ask. Sledging, it's not openly. Like there's no open sledging like you would see at the footy or if you went out to any kind of contact sport or there's no sledging like that.
It's a bit more insidious that it's behind their back on the internet.
Yeah, well, there's keyboard warriors everywhere. But I suppose it comes out. It depends who you ask. I don't mind a little bit of. I definitely lean into the psychological side of competing. Definitely. If you jump onto my Instagram or social media, you'll see that I'm training and whatnot. It's unlikely that you'll see anything that I do in terms of top sets or PRs during a training cycle. I don't want to share that stuff because the people that I'm sharing it to are the people who I'm competing against. So I don't want to give them that kind of information. I don't really post. If I do post some lifts that I'm doing, I'm not going to tell you how heavy it is. Don't be silly. Whereas, some of the boys I compete against, open books, and to each their own, but I can kind of tap onto social media at any time and see old mates lifting, X amount of kilograms, and he's even been so kind as to give me an RPE. Copy that, roger that. And so I know that when I see him in next month, 2 months away, I know what he's doing. He's just shared it with me, so I can either push or I can yield. I think part of the strongman game is knowing where to push and where to yield. If we talk about deadlifts in the strongman community, well, the best deadlifter is Hank Turnison. End of conversation. If you're going up against Hank Turnison in a deadlift, you don't push that guy for, he's gonna go 1,000 pounds plus.
Yeah.
So you understand that you are fighting for second. Mm-hmm. Don't poke the bear, and maybe try and get him in the overheads. So I like to kind of allow that to play out on the day. For me and my competitors, I don't want them knowing what I'm up to. So I don't mind leaning into a little bit of the psychological side of strongman and competing.
I think it's a big part because it's not necessarily max attempts. You do need to save it because you're playing for points. So being smart about it is definitely the way to go. One of the really good examples of that, I think it was the middleweight series in Queensland. Tyson Morrissey was up against one of his guys in a deadlift for reps, and he stopped. They went out together. It was for time, 60 seconds. Tyson was going to win, but he stood there and he cheered on his guy, and then he got 2 reps, I think. Tyson just did 3.
Yeah.
He could have done 10.
Yeah.
Why is he going to do 10 though?
Yeah, 100%.
And that's part of, a lot of people watch Strongman and are like, why wouldn't you do 10 for the show? It's like, well...
You got Stones coming up next.
Yeah. But you got to know which parts important to push.
Yeah.
And a lot of Strongman, especially at a high level, is a show. It's... World's Strongest Man is a TV company. It's not just a competition. So it is about putting on the show. And as you know, I've watched you compete. You put on a show. It's enjoyable. But you can do that and be smart too.
Absolutely.
So when you were going through your beginnings and starting to get good at competing, was there a point where you realised that? A really clear kind of I don't have to put it all on the table.
There wasn't really a definitive moment. Not really. I think a lot of it has just come with experience. Maybe if I've gone out for a clean and press event, and no one else has pressed more than 5 reps, whatever. Then maybe in my there might have been somewhere along the lines where I thought, well, maybe I don't need to press more than 5 here, boys. Whereas if I was going out earlier in the flight or in the lineup, then I would have done 10, 12. No real kind of defining moment, but just all things that have kind of come with experience and learning.
Well, half a century worth of competitions.
Yeah.
To use a cricket analogy.
50
competitions are going to teach you a few things. When did you first go and compete overseas?
First competition I went and did overseas was in 2019. 2019, I went over for Thailand's Strongest Man. This one was not a pro show by any means. I think these days there's a lot of competing overseas has kind of been put on a pedestal, so to speak, and a lot of athletes are kind of infatuated just by the idea or maybe the notoriety that comes with competing at an international level. But I think that notoriety gets kind of taken away if the competition is pay to play. And Thailand's Strongest Man was pay to play. There was no one sponsoring that. I wasn't invited. I signed up because I kind of wanted a trip to Thailand. I did some backpacking and some traveling through Southeast Asia in my early 20s, and I thought, loved it. Would love to go back and now do Strongman. So I went over there. It was in the northern region of Thailand in this amazing city called Chiang Mai. Chiang Mai is the new city is built within the old kingdom walls, so it still has this ancient kingdom walls. It's even surrounded by a moat and has 4 entrances in on the north, south, east, and west facing walls. But they've built a new modern city within the walls. It's amazing. We competed right outside the walls, and it was a wonderful setup. They definitely dressed it up like a pro show. And the crowd was huge. People just walking by, would stop for hours and watch us kind of do our thing. We had, in terms of events, we had a max log. I think it was rising. Maybe it was 3 attempts for max, or maybe it was rising. It was a max log. There was a front hold. So we held a bag of, a big sack of rice for as long as we could in front of us. We had a car deadlift for reps. we had a truck pull, and there was a stone loading series. And that was my first international contest, and I loved it. Loved it. But it was by no means a pro show, and it was by no means to the standard of international shows that I've done to date. The division, I think, was 4 or 5 boys that, like myself, had just kind of rocked up and signed up.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really anything to write home about.
Yeah.
A lot of fun.
So, and then what was the next one, and was that a pro show?
Next one was kind of closer, closer to the pro status. It was China in must have also been 2019.
They've done China a couple of times.
This was China in 2019. It was not pay to play, so this was sponsored by the. This was sponsored by another federation run by Graham Lansfield, who sent us over to compete in like Western China, like Tibet. We went to Tibet, like, for sure. It was a long way away. I think we flew into Guangzhou, Lanzhou, one of the two, Lanzhou, and then another internal flight from Lanzhou to Guangzhou, and then like an 8-hour bus west up into the mountains, like past the yurts, the Mongolian yurts and the Tibetan flags. And we were really out in rural China where they like had not seen white people before. It was crazy. So, I mean, I wasn't out of pocket for that show. They paid to have me there, and we did some cool events. I think we had, there was a loading medley with these ingots, these like beautiful, like old Chinese bars, kind of like half like crescent moon shaped, but would sit on the floor, and they went from like 100 to 150 kilos. We had to load those. There was a farmer's carry. There was a chain yoke. There was a bus pull. There was a tire flip. And there was something else that's foolish that I can't remember. But that was my first, I suppose, exposure to like, a little bit more towards the pro side of things. Man, the crowds were enormous. A very strange part of the world. They piled us into this stadium, huge stadium. I don't know, like you could have put, 50, 60,000 people in there, like nuts. And on the walls, they had painted the Olympic rings.
Okay.
So I don't know what they told all the locals. Like they either told them that the Olympic Games was here in where we were, which was this tiny little town called Dubbo, or they told them that World's Strongest Man was here and we were the contestants. But it was that was a wild trip, man. People following us to and from the hotel for photos. Like I'm not talking a couple of people, like hundreds of people following us around. Man, I had women giving me their babies for photos. Like it was insane. And that was kind of my a real eye-opening moment to wow, people outside of our own community, like they have a real kind of admiration and respect for us as athletes. Here, in our neck of the woods, no one bats an eyelid. If you're a powerlifter, strongman, bodybuild, doesn't matter. Like no one cares. We're used to big, strong, jacked people here in this country. But over there, man, like they could not believe their eyes. Like it was the craziest thing they'd ever seen, just us walking through their town. So it was that was special. That was a special one.
Yeah, cool. And when you went back to China, which was what, last year?
Last year, yep.
Was it in the same region?
Same spot.
Yeah, same spot.
Same spot. Yeah, they had us there again.
Yep.
And like exactly the same. Different crew of boys. We took Josh Pataka with us, who had just come off the back of winning Australia's Strongest Man. There was Sean Gillen with us, who went on to win Ireland's Strongest Man that year. A couple of the older heads, Luke Reynolds, fantastically established strongman. Excuse me. Sean Poole from Victoria, same, been in the game since before it was a game. We brought a real strong Aussie side, and to be fair, we dominated. Josh took first, myself in second place, and Sean Gillen in third in a division of like 30 people. There was the Aussies, or the Aussie side. Obviously we had Sean Gillen representing Ireland, and we had Sean Poole representing New Zealand. But the Australian side, there was Russians, the Chinese, people from all over the world came to compete. But we just we we dominated. Similar events too. I think we had, the chain yoke again. This thing was a pig of a yoke. We had the farmer's carry was back out.
I can't imagine any chain yoke not being a pig.
No, this
awful event.
This thing was this. It was more like it was more of a traditional yoke in a modern era. Yeah, okay. You know, if you kind of if I pull up a picture, you would recognize what I'm talking about. I suppose like maybe you would have seen an old photo of some farmer back in the day, you know, carrying bales of water, you know, of 2 buckets, maybe with a crossbar across his back through a field somewhere. Yeah. It was like that, but on each side of the yoke were these huge, like swinging sharp metal coffins. And as we would run, they would turn, and they were just they were the Achilles breakers, and they would turn in and they would like bite you on the back of the ankles. They were gnarly. And we actually, you know, the head of the team of the Australian side actually put in like a formal complaint. Was like, man, this is straight up dangerous. And I agreed. I thought, you know, if they swing in and, you know, tap you on the back of the Achilles, like you're a long way from Medicare. Yeah. And they were like, no, we'll take care of it. We'll take care of it. And so they ended up, you know, we thought, okay, good. They're going to, you know, change them or whatever. We rock up the next morning and they've just brought out like pool noodles, and they've quartered them up and just like taped on pool noodles to the bottom of these sharp edges. It was crazy. You know, this thing empty was about 300 kilos. So it was, you know, it was no joke. Yeah. But, you know, it was all part and parcel of traveling to a fantastically weird corner of the world and competing in strongman. And you know, a real core element of competing in strongman is adaptability. Yeah. You know, we don't have standard dimensions for yokes everywhere in the world. You know, it's not like a barbell that's always going to be, you know, 2180 long and, you know, 28 mils in diameter. There is no like set standard for these pieces of equipment. You kind of just have to make it up as you go. And that's what we did. Which is
part of the interesting part of the sport that frustrates the living shit out of me, because I'm primarily a powerlifter who, when I coach strongman guys and they go to events, I'm like, this is doing my head in. They're changing the weights. They've changed the implements. They've like fucked this up, or this is dangerous. And I'm just like, oh mate, like it stresses me out. But I also have to take a step back and go, okay, this is part of the sport. I think some people take the piss in their events. They're a bit haphazard about that and really make it up on the fly a bit too much. I think a little bit of standardisation would go a long way, or at least committing to what you say is going to happen instead of changing it. Having done so many competitions, what's something that you see all the time that happens in terms of changing on the fly?
Look, I think promoters take risks sometimes. You know, calculated risks. It would be boring if we rocked up to every strongman contest and it was log, farmers, yoke, deadlift, stones. Yeah. Like it would be boring. So, you know, promoters come up with these creative events, and sometimes even will customize equipment or implements for the competition. Yes. And we get malfunctions from time to time. It happens. It's, you know, it's part of the game. Yeah. Some people get kind of up in arms about it. Some people, like myself, tend to just kind of shrug our shoulders a little bit and acknowledge that that's footy. So, you know, we crack on. Yeah. But yeah, it's part of the game. I mean, I suppose the biggest example that kind of comes to mind. This one was probably a little. This one was big. In New South Wales Strongest Man of 2022, we had a rising frame deadlift. Oh, yeah. Now the frame had been custom made, and it was a giant timber frame, you know, built with these big sleepers. And what would happen is, you know, in the men's division, you know, we'd go under 80s, under 90s, under 105s, and then the opens. The women were running on a separate frame, you know, and they had the 64s, 73s, 82s, and the opens. They're on a separate frame. My attention is with the men. The under 80s would kind of open up and, you know, be lifting around, I don't know, 250 kilos, whatever. and we got up to 250, 260, 270, 280. And because it was rising, athletes would kind of bump in and bump out when they wanted to. Yeah. And as we got to 300, maybe the 90s start rolling in and they have a warm up and they're going up. And then they get up to kind of 320, 340, 105s are coming in. By the time the Opens boys got to this timber frame, it had been picked up and dropped dozens of times and not, carefully placed down, maybe a lifter was excited and gave that thing a power bomb back down to the ground, and it was falling apart. It was splitting, and it was quickly apparent that this thing was not going to last. So the promoter, the organizer of the competition, pulled an emergency meeting. Boys, this frame is not going to make it if you keep slamming it. Yeah. By this stage, Opens men's hadn't even really begun, and we were kind of put into this position where rules all of a sudden changed, and there was no longer going to be rising bar. You all from here on out had, I think at the time it was 2 more attempts. Okay. 2 more attempts, and we need to get some numbers. And that was kind of a tough place to be because, this was happening at, say, 350 kilos. Hank Turnison still hadn't deadlifted. Yeah. And that guy's going up around 500 on this thing. Mind you, this frame was probably around 18 inches off the ground. Yeah. A barbell, for reference, is 9. So it was, it's a fairly elevated deadlift, which means that you can likely handle more load than you usually would off the floor. Yep. I fell into the trap of getting a little bit frustrated myself because I think I'd only put on one attempt just to kind of warm up and get a point on the board at 350. But, I was in it to win it. And I knew that I wasn't going to push Hank for 450, 500, but in order to kind of get top 3 in a bad event for me, I had to touch over 400. But the 105s were still going, and they were still playing for points too. So what do you do? Look, luckily the frame held out, and we all put attempts on the board. But if we had had time again, maybe selections would have been a little bit different. For instance, personally, I remember jumping from 350 to 400 because I figured, if I don't have time to put in a good attempt, big players need to make big swings here. You know what I mean? I need numbers on the board. Yeah. And I think I pulled 400, and then the next attempt at 420 I missed anyways. But, these kind of things, they happen. Mm-hmm. So it's part of the game.
Yeah, I think it's a very good way to look at it because it's often not, like the promoter's not doing it to be malicious.
No.
They've done their best, and in the moment it's like, well, this is fucked up. And that happens. It happens in every sport. Something goes wrong, equipment malfunctions. You've just got to pivot. You start acting like throwing your toys out of the pram and having a tantrum. It's never going to go well. No one's going to make any progress. And but that's something I'd see a lot in powerlifting. It's like, stuff happens. We're all volunteers. We're all human. We're going to make mistakes. Like sometimes the bar gets misloaded. Sometimes the pin height's wrong on the mono. Same thing's going to be the same as Strongman. It's all volunteers. There's no one getting paid to do it, to like load the weights and make the equipment, and well, they're probably getting paid for the at least the materials. But if you're making something completely from scratch, you don't know what's going to happen once it gets lifted. You're like, well, it should hold out. Theoretically,
hopefully,
is it going to hold out for 20 attempts where people are slamming it on the floor? Then maybe not. I remember that frame very vividly. Was it the one that tilted heaps too?
It did. Yeah. It did tilt.
It was very back heavy.
I don't remember which side it tilted, but the frame had the handles were from end to end. So I don't know the dimensions. Would be something similar to this table that we're in front of. Maybe it was 1.8 or 2 meters long, and the handles just went from end to end.
Right, so you couldn't really center yourself.
You got to kind of eyeball where you're lifting that from.
So if your spatial awareness is up the creek, then you're shit out of luck.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
Right. So to pivot from competing, well, actually to finish off with the international competitions, you just got back from Uzbekistan. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
So which is just south of Kazakhstan.
It's in there.
It's
in the conglomerate of stands.
Yes. So a random piece of information. A history major.
Oh, here we go. Here we go.
So I know a little bit about the region, and the stands all come from the fact that it was the Persian Empire, and stand meant that land belonged to the Persian empire. That's why they all end in Stan. If I'm wrong on that, I'm sure someone will correct me. But from my studies of the area, I'm pretty sure that's right. But yeah, Uzbekistan, very random place to go again, like Western China. What was that like?
Gorgeous.
Looked fun.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of fun. Man, the Uzbeki people are beautiful people. They are so loving and hospitable. It honestly felt like, in the strangest way possible, it felt like coming home.
Yeah.
It was bizarre. You know, who's gone to Uzbekistan? Not you. No. None of our mates. You know, no one's just off to Uzbekistan. Yeah. So it was a real unique experience. I was actually talking. We were hosted by the Ministry of Tourism, so it's actually a government-funded competition that they run. Yeah. And the Minister of Tourism brought his nephew Saeed, and he was translating for us and helping us and hanging out with us and having meals with us and whatnot. And at one stage, I even said to him, I said, "Saeed, man, like, everyone's so nice. Like, I'm having the best time." And he said, you know, this is what we do. Hospitality is our national pride. Yeah, okay. It looked like the Balinese. It made Balinese hospitality look like barbarianism. Yeah. Like these guys are just are so amazing. But outside of the people, the place is beautiful. Yep. Very interesting kind of place. Still has a very like Soviet vibe. Yep. Still very communist kind of vibes. In terms of, you know, as you're walking around in the streets, a lot of the places, like businesses and shop fronts, have the exact same blue block font sign writing for their business. Yeah. And the buildings all look very similar, almost like, you know, someone's just kind of copy and pasted the same building over and over again. You know, so there's that kind of vibe, but it's clean, like immaculate, immaculately clean, no graffiti, no, you know, damage, or, you know, there's no that you could eat off the floor. Like it was immaculately clean. The competition itself was very well run, televised to the local or maybe the national Uzbek TV. Yep. So they'd, you know, big cameras on us at all times. It was a 2-day competition, and over the 2 days, I think we had 8 events, so 4 each day. Again, in the true nature of Strongman having to be adaptable, some of the events changed on the spot, which kind of just is what it was. One of the reasons being, for the first event, it was a carry. It was a carry medley. We didn't actually have to load anything, but there were these massive ornamental timber pieces that were kind of scattered throughout the city. One was like 100 kilos, one was 120 kilos, and all we had to do was simply pick it up, run it 20 meters, drop the first one, pick the other one up, run it back 20 meters, and that was the run. However, it was done on like a sand track. I don't know. I think they did some kind of racing, maybe like dog or horse or camel or something, but it was on like sand. And now for the carry medley, like not a problem, because like it wasn't inherently very heavy. But the next event was meant to be yoke. And the yoke they wanted to run across the sand, and you know, it would have had to be somewhere up around 400 or north of 400 for a bunch of open boys to compete with. And our national representative took one look at it and went, "Nah, we're not doing heavy yoke on sand, boys. You know, this is an ACL waiting to happen." So, all right, we'll scrap the yoke, and all of a sudden it was deadlift for reps. Choose your own adventure. You get to pick one. The lighter bar is 250 kilos. Or the heavy bar is 320 kilos. One rep of 320 will trump all reps at 250. So, you know, good thing I packed the deadlift suit, because deadlift was on the cards all of a sudden. And that's kind of, again, part of the game. You just got to be ready and be strong for anything, always. Yeah. But no, they loved us. They loved us. Their thing over there is they're obviously fans of Strongman, but they're big on weightlifting and also kettlebell sport. Yep. They all do it, and they take it very seriously and competitively. So,
which would be a Soviet hangover.
Yeah, surely. So
not necessarily a bad hangover.
No.
There's some worse ones.
No. So we were hosted by some of the boys had actually competed in the 2000 Sydney Olympics. Yeah, right. In weightlifting. Yeah. And amongst the division of competitors, there were some fantastic athletes as well. One of which was the 2022 Commonwealth Games champion in the Opens men's division or the over 109 division in weightlifting.
Yeah.
You know, the guy had a 170 kilo snatch and a 240 kilo clean and jerk. Like, he was a beast with a barbell, but just got buried, you know, in a strongman contest over 8 events. But that's always going to happen because, you know, he's just not particularly ready for the demands of strongman. We had some world's strongest man representatives in the division as well, which was cool. It's always good to kind of hang out. I love being the little fish.
Mm-hmm.
I love being the little fish. I love hanging out with boys who have, you know, they're stronger than me, they've done more than me, they have more experience than me. You know, they can share knowledge and kind of impart wisdom upon me. These are the guys that I want to hang out with and associate with. So, you know, they were present as well, which was awesome. One of whom I've actually looked up to personally since the beginning of my journey, and that's Rongo.
Yeah, okay.
So getting to compete against him was kind of surreal, you know, a real kind of full circle type of moment. Someone who I'd, you know, watched arise to become Western Australia's strongest man in 2015, and then go on to Australia's strongest man in 2016 and win, to then compete in World's Strongest Man, I believe, in 2019.
Yeah.
You know, compete across the world in Strongman Champions League, which, you know, back in the day effectively was the World's Strongest Man. You know, when there was a divide between IFSA and World's Strongest Man. So. It was a good trip.
Yeah.
It was a really good trip. Would I go back there to compete? In a heartbeat. Would I go back there to hang out and travel? Hard to say. You know, hard to say. It's not really a country that's kind of well established for their tourism, which is why they had us there. But I also don't really understand why they would use a strongman contest to try and drive tourism.
Yeah. Well, I guess, it's an interesting one.
Yeah.
I think a lot of those countries, you know, since the fall of the wall, have been struggling to build themselves back up and find their own national identity again. And, you know, they lost it for so long. And they're very strong cultures. Whereas communism kind of inherently destroys all culture bar communism. So, you know, it's not that long ago that the wall went down. And they have the opportunity to really build themselves back up and find their own way again. So, you know, good on them for trying. And hospitality as a national pride's pretty good bloody national pride to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you want to encourage people to travel somewhere, then hosting a bunch of international people for a sport and showing them a really good time is a pretty good way, because you've come back and everyone else has gone back to their respective countries and gone, that place is amazing.
Yeah.
You should go and compete there if you get the opportunity.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
You know, that's inherent in a not a bad strategy for
bit out of the box, but
bit out of the box, but hey,
I see where they're going.
Yeah. So to pivot away from that, when did you get into coaching, and what was the beginnings of that look like?
So I started with coaching. Would have been 2021. 2021 was when I began, but it was always part of the, again, long-term plan. You know, when I arrived in the, I suppose, fitness community, which was 2016, after finishing up in the workforce, working on job sites and in factories and driving trucks, you know, I'd realized that working with people in fitness and strength was what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So took a job in a commercial gym, and that's where I began. And starting that job, I soon realized that, which was in kind of like sales. It was a sales-based role. Starting that job, I soon realized that where I would like to personally pivot to would be helping people achieve their goals, whatever they may be. Now, mind you, I was still in infancy stages of strongman, so I didn't even know I wanted to be a strongman coach. But helping people, I knew I wanted to do that.
Yep.
Realize their potential and achieve what they, you know, deem to be amazing.
Yeah.
So I kind of took on board that job as, I suppose, like my own apprenticeship or traineeship. Like, I really wanted to learn about gyms and how they worked from the ground up, and how I could interact with people in the fitness space from the ground up, so that eventually I could move into the PT space.
Yeah.
So I was in the gym for 5 years, and within that time I ticked off my certificates in fitness, so I became an accredited personal trainer. And, you know, in 2021, this is kind of where, you know, I would have competed across 20, 30 competitions or so. And had some good experience in strongman from grassroots level to international level. Sure. And I knew, right, this is what I want to do. I want to show others how to navigate their journey of strongman. There's lots of ins and outs. You know, it's not necessarily about being just the strongest man. Mm-hmm. It's about being strong and being a good strongman, and understanding the pathways in terms of competitions and realizing where it is that you want to go with this. So I figured I could help people navigate their way across, because I've been from grassroots to state level to national level to international level. Yeah. And that was 2021. 2021, I actually originated online. It was my first my first point of dealing with clients remotely. And it wasn't long after that that I took on a face-to-face role in my gym at J Train Athletic Performance, where I had been anyway for 6 or 7 years at that point. And I wanted to kind of help people face-to-face as well. And that portion of the journey kicked off at the beginning of 2022, so about 2.5 years ago now. And I love it. Yeah, I love it. I love strongman. I've aligned my purpose with strongman, and I'm yielding the positive effects of how that's contributed to my life, and I now get to share that with other people, and I love it.
It's very cool, and it's a very cool reason to get into coaching too, I think. And I've said this, I feel there's a few things that I say on every podcast, one of which is that you'll find a common thread amongst good coaches. It's that their motivation begins with helping people, doesn't begin with making money, doesn't begin with making people the strongest. It's I want to help people achieve something, and they're going to use strength to facilitate that. And it's like, it's more than just the strength, and that's quite palpable in what you just said, and very kind of obvious in how you carry yourself. Like, you want more for your people than just to be a strong man. It's like you want them to be a good strong man, a good person, and find purpose in what they're doing. Like, that's a very tangible kind of effect, which I think that's how we find meaning as coaches, right? You give something beyond just that physical culture. It's like it becomes not your personality, not your identity. It becomes like a purpose that has meaning. And it's like, yeah, it's just lifting weights. But it has so much more
Absolutely
to it. So if you can help other people achieve that, I think that's a really good motivation. But having watched you coach your people, having, seen you compete as well, and knowing you enough to, chat and watch you online and stuff, like, it's how you carry yourself and how you act is like, you are who you say you are, you do what you say you're going to do, your motivation is very obvious, and that's that you want the best for your people. Where do you think that comes from? Is it that carryover, like you said, from this is what it gave me, I want to share that with others?
Good question. And I suppose it depends, like, how deep do we want to go with that question?
Yeah, as deep as you want to go.
I think at surface level, I understand the impact of which it's come into my life and changed my life for the better forever.
Yeah.
I will always have this, depending on how long this career span is for myself, hopefully a long time, I will always have this era of my life of being strongman. I don't play strongman. I don't, just tap into being a strongman for an hour or two a day when I go to the gym. This is all the time. And, what that's given me is, it's changed who I was from a younger, kind of more turbulent self. It's given me purpose. It's given me belief. It's given me accomplishment. It's strengthened myself physically. It's strengthened myself emotionally. My relationships have improved. My outlook on life has improved. My everything has improved because of strongman. So sharing that with people is definitely the driver of kind of why I do this, but where that comes from, who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
I feel like it's one of those things. It's either you've found the benefit in it, and you're like, this is amazing. I'm going to share it with everyone. It's like spreading the gospel of strength, or it's like the direct result of having it or not having it as a youngster. Like, you know, I didn't step foot in a gym until I was 34. Maybe even later. When I first started training altogether was when the first time I'd ever been in a gym. Like I walked in, I was like, I don't know what any of this shit is. And my purpose now is to like go, everyone should step foot in the gym. This is, have you seen these places? They're amazing. Like, this is what it can do for you. So like, and like one of the regrets, I have two kind of regrets in my life. I know I can't change them, but one is to have stopped drinking sooner because like you, my 20s were turbulent and just wasteful in that all I did was party and I had no purpose. I thought I had purpose in music, but I just partied. And to have gone to the gym earlier, but I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't do it the way I did it. So, but I think that it's like if you find something and it's like this has so much value, this has provided me so much value, I found so much meaning beyond just being good at it. You want to share that with people.
Absolutely.
You know? And that gives you a really good base as a coach, I think, so that you have not only the experience and the ability to technically show how people how to do the movements and, you know, periodize and organize their training. You've also got this like emotional base of like, this is how you handle shit when you compete. This is how you handle stuff outside your life because you're all in. It's like, you want to know what it is to be like third strongest in the country. This is what it takes. And you can show that to other people. Because you've got a good crew of strongmen now, like your team's impressive. They're very strong. They're doing really well. I train with a bunch of them. You've got Big Joe Giant who came from me to you, which was like, I was like, yeah, great, go. He's going to be great for you, you know? And I watch how you program for your guys and how you train personally. And like I see a lot of the stuff and I watch everyone's kind of stuff. As a coach, you kind of look around and go, what are they doing and why would they be doing that? Like you're interested in that stuff. I look at some of your choices and I go, that's a really interesting choice. Like I feel like I would have made a similar one or like, I'm like, wow, that's interesting. Like why are you doing that? And I always talk to Josh. So I'm like, oh, why is he getting you to do that? Or he'll tell me about it anyway. How do you approach training a strongman?
Good question. Very broad question.
Sure. Let me reframe it then. Where would you start if someone came to you and said, I want to be a strongman, and they're like one comp in? What's your first kind of port of call?
The first thing is establishing some kind of foundation. Can't fire a cannon out of a canoe.
Yep.
You know, whereas people often come to me and they want to compete in strongman, they want to do strongman, they want to lift heavy stones, they want to run heavy yokes. That's great. We'll get there. Let's see how you handle load first, and let's see how you can move first. A lot of the guys, you know, aren't outliers. We were discussing this before. So they don't come with these fantastic baselines, and establishing a baseline comes through more so general strength training. You know, getting used to barbell strength training is usually my first port of call. You know, understanding and improving in squat patterns, in pressing patterns, and in deadlift patterns before we start to branch out into the other foundational elements of strongman really is my first kind of, that's my first priority. Yep. When we talk about strongman, the metrics of strength and how we measure strength are slightly different to what most people are used to. And what most people are used to is powerlifting. Powerlifting has this huge impact on the wider community, you know, of people. If you train at a gym, there's probably someone there that, you know, at least trains like a powerlifter. Whether they compete in powerlifting but someone is doing heavy squats, heavy bench, heavy deadlifts. Our metrics are slightly different. Squatting patterns are important for developing, lower body strength, posterior strength, but definitely not the most important metric. And typically I'll lean towards more of an anterior dominant squat, like a front squat, wherever it may be, whether it's, zombie squat, front squat in a weightlifter's rack position, genie pose, bodybuilder pose, whatever you want to call it. That usually takes precedent for me when we come to squatting patterns. Pressing is a little bit different. We don't lean towards the bench press as heavily. Most of our pressing variations are overhead. And there also needs to be an element of learning how to clean weight. So whether it's with a barbell, log, dumbbells, whatever else you can imagine that, Strongman has the audacity to come out with and impose upon us, the clean and press is a really important metric. And then the deadlift is probably the most important, I would say. And the reason is it's always going to be an event. Or forever in terms of like strongman competing, you'll always be faced with a deadlift. What kind of variation? We don't know. Is it going to be from 9 inches, 14 inches, 18 inches, barbell, deadlift bar, axle bar, trap bar, car deadlift frame, you name it. There are so many different variations. And then we move on to, is it going to be, a max deadlift, a rising deadlift, deadlift ladder, medley for reps, whatever. So we have to develop a fairly broad general foundation first before we start to specify into, loading, stone lifting, carrying implements, whatever it may be. Step 2 is, let's assume that this person who's just come on board wants to then compete in their next strongman competition. Fantastic. We then want to aim our focus to whatever is needed of us in that strongman contest. Now, these days in Australia, most competitions have 5 events. Now, if your event has, let's keep it simple, this is kind of like strongman staples, yoke, farmers, log, deadlift, and stones, then for that period of time during your specific phase of training, that's what you're training for. Mm-hmm. There's not much use training for much else if you don't have to be good at much else outside of those 5 things. Yeah. So that's definitely where I'll spend the focus of our time, is developing the skills necessary to be good at whatever you have to be good at that's coming up. Yeah. Maybe in periods of time where you don't have a competition coming up, for instance now, Joe's not competing until October. He's got some downtime, dealing with some issues with the body at the moment, getting this elbow healthy, getting this knee healthy. He doesn't need to be good at running heavy yokes. We just finished that. Now give the body a break from heavy yoke, give the body a break from heavy farmers. Let's get back into moving the body well and making the body feel like a human body before we go back into the demands of a specific phase for competitive strongman. To kind of layer into that, I think what's important to understand is, again, if we just take the closest relative that we have of powerlifters, I suppose would it be fair to say that it's uncommon to see powerlifters compete many more than 3 times throughout the year.
Yeah.
On average, right? It's uncommon. And for this reason, what is favorable is having these lovely, lengthy periods of time where you can spend a lot of time building this beautiful base, working on building work capacity, and you can kind of start to periodize your training to this gorgeous peak where you can be as strong as fuck with squatting and benching and deadlifting, at a time. In strongman, because we might compete more frequently, we don't have that luxury all the time. You got to kind of put your eggs in certain baskets, so to speak. The back end of the year, let's take Big Joe for an example. He's likely going to have 2, maybe 3 competitions in the space. Whether he knows this or is aware of this is yet to be determined.
He's finding it out right now.
Yeah, but he's qualified for the Australian Amateur Strongman Championships in mid-October. He's qualified for New South Wales Strongest Man in sometime in November. I actually think it's being hosted up here this year for the first time, which is going to be fun. There's also, and this is kind of where I would like to steer him, there's also room for him to compete for a spot to get to Australia's Strongest Man in Canberra at the beginning of November. So that's 3 competitions in a very short amount of time. Yeah. And I think that period's about 6 weeks. It's not realistic to have him peaked for that entire period of time. And this is very common with strongmen when they're competing regularly, is being peaked tends to become quite a luxury. not a necessity. When it happens, we're on and we're super strong.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be like that all the time. I actually had a mentor who told me this. All we need to do in strongman, and this comes to like competing overseas, whatever, is we need to be 70% ready all the time.
Yeah.
70% ready all year round. I could get a call up tomorrow and say, hey, there's a spot for you to compete. Here, you in? Bag's packed.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that Mackie Boy's bag is packed and I'm ready to go because I'm 70% ready all the time.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I would structure. Coming back to the point, that's kind of how I would structure someone kind of getting into the sport and kind of how I would guide them towards leaning into competitive strongman.
This is where like sort of, and we'll get into this a little bit, but the context of concurrent or conjugate periodization for powerlifting, it lends itself really well to strongman training because you can be 70%. Like conjugate training kind of keeps you at that. You're strong all the time. And when yes, we'll peak, but the peak's not as long as you would do in like a linear periodized kind of peak. I find that translates really well. I love training strongman for that purpose. It's like, well, we just do all this stuff all the time and then we funnel it into what you need to do for your comp. Like we know that you've got all this time. Like one of my strongmen, Brendan, just unfortunately had to pull out of Static Monsters Worlds.
I saw.
Due to personal reasons. But we had the luxury of like he's put all his eggs in that basket and we're just training for that.
Beautiful.
And it was like we treated it like a powerlifting comp. It's like we're going to do all this stuff and you're going to be peaked, ready to go. And unfortunately that's now not the reality, so we move on. Okay. Next thing he's doing the qualifier for the Arnold's in Sydney as well.
Great.
As an adaptive athlete. So now we'll start to go, all right, what are those events? And we'll start to broaden the scope a bit to build the base for that and then funnel back in. But I think being 70%, 80% ready all the time is a really good way to look at it because if you're feeling, particularly as powerlifters, we can learn from strongmen like this, which they'll hate hearing, is that if you're feeling good, then maybe that's time to do a comp rather than beating yourself into the ground to do a comp in 12 weeks. It's like, I'm feeling really strong at the moment. Nothing really hurts. Where's a comp? Yeah, like 4 weeks. Cool. Let's peak at 4 weeks. You don't need much more than 4 to 6 weeks, I reckon.
I agree.
If you're sitting at that kind of 70% readiness, you don't need a lot of time.
No.
You don't need 12 weeks of singles and all this bullshit.
No.
Obviously, if you're training in that modality, you do.
Maybe the only difference, again, coming to I agree with that. That's a fair amount of time to peak someone's strength. Considering the work has been done in lead up to that 4 to 6 weeks. The only thing to layer in is the specificity of the implements. Yeah. Is it something that that you've handled before? Is it something that you might need to spend a few more weeks kind of just getting in touch with? Yeah. For instance, the first event for Brendan's competition in October has just been announced. It's the max log. Okay. Now, granted, training for static, he's already kind of probably in that rhythm of training with the log. If you're going to have that fantastic period of time between now and between now and August is Static Monster World Championships, so next month, to have him compete. But understanding like which implements we need to be good at is a factor in strongman. Yeah. If it's log and deadlift, sweet, we'll get there. But it could be some weird, like the boys at Western Sydney Strongest have come up with the Zercher yoke squat for reps.
Oh my god!
You know what I mean. So that's going to be very challenging for the athletes to kind of wrap their head around.
Sounds like something that Bryce Purton would have come up with.
It does actually.
He will excel at that.
He would. No, he's an incredible athlete. He would excel at that. But that might demand of an athlete spending a little bit more time. Squatting in a Zercher position with a yoke. But then that being said, when the athletes get to competition, it's highly likely that the yoke is going to be different to what they've been training with anyway. So it's a little bit different and sometimes a little bit uncertain.
I think that like you're very right in that you need to practice the implements. You have to practice the sport, particularly if say we haven't done stones for a while. It's like I'll chuck stones in for a wave because I'll do 3 week waves. So it's like, okay, well, you're doing your dynamic work is stones.
Yep, cool.
So you get to touch it, everything now and then. It's not so broad that it's not specific. I want to try and keep the implements in there as much as possible to get used to them. But And like you said, you don't get that much notice on what the events are going to be, but you can kind of touch everything a lot, build the base very broadly, and be ready. It's like, well, I haven't done this in a while. Okay, well, let's chuck it in for 3 to 6 weeks. You know, let's work on it and get your skill level up. So you can express the strength. But there should be like some things that are in there all the time. Obviously, overhead pressing, squatting, anterior bias, and some sort of deadlift all the time. And you can keep that.
I'm actually very familiar with this conjugate method of training because it was the method which I personally favoured for a number of years when I was in that infancy period of training for strongman. So I loved rotating, maximal efforts and dynamic efforts on 3-week waves, time and time again. One of the findings that I found personally was I developed this incredible speed strength, like the dynamic work of which I favoured a lot of plyometrics. Louis was big on jumps. I believe the number that he actually put to it was somewhere between 24 to 48 jumps a week. I think 24 was suboptimal, 48 was also suboptimal, but somewhere in the middle there, 36 jumps was pretty good. So I used to wave up my jumps around kind of 24 to 36 a week, maybe doing sets of 3 every minute on the minute, between 8, 10 and 12 sets of jumps across the week. What I found is I developed this incredible explosive quality, but my top end strength, it didn't develop as much as I would have liked. Again, this is personally, this is me speaking from the anecdotal experience that I have. It didn't develop as much as I'd like. I was still able to deadlift, in the vicinity of 300 to 310, more or less kind of around the year. And my squatting strength was decent. Again, I kind of built up to squatting 300, and nearabouts to there. Clean and pressing, I got up to 160 kilos on logs, so pressing power went up significantly. But I really wanted to push up to much larger numbers, and I was never really able to develop that strength with the conjugate style of training for the fairly extensive time that I did it. Just speaking for myself.
Yeah. Well, I think the beauty of that type of training is that ultimately what dictates it is you have, you've got your maximal effort, your dynamic effort. Everyone kind of understands that part of it. Your repeated effort is also extremely important, but it shouldn't be limited to just bodybuilding. It's like a lot of people think, oh yeah, you do like your max effort, one RMs and up to 3 RM. Cool, yeah. And then we do our speed days really light, cool. And then we just train like a bodybuilder. No, like for strength, you need to keep some of those compound movements in the repeated effort and just progress them linearly early through that.
So that 10 times fast.
Yeah. Well, the amount of times I've said linear and periodization on this podcast and not messed it up, because every time I say it at home, I'm like, but that's probably like one of the few times that I've stumbled over it, but I don't have the tongue for linear early. I think that's where it falls down. You're not doing enough building in the main lifts. And I don't know from your experience, but I think like the good thing is that you tailor it to what you need to do, and ultimately the goal should be to auto-regulate all the training.
Oh yeah,
and not be bound to a style. And I think like my way of explaining conjugate to people is like you just get to find what works for you and put it all together. Like you do a bit of all of it. That's what it is.
I will definitely say that it was the most fun I've ever had with training. Yeah, like bar none. Yeah, bar none.
Have you always coached yourself?
No. So I've had a handful of coaches over the years. The first coach in strength sports I had was Marty Harlow. He was the coach that I had through weightlifting. Then I progressed to James Brody. James Brody coached me when I first started with J-Train Athletic Performance. He taught me a lot, and he kind of opened my eyes to the broader strength community. And he has his gym is heavily influenced by Louis Simmons. So we have a lot of kind of West Side inspired gear in our gym, reverse hypers, the inverse curls, all these kind of more bands and chains you can poke a bloody stick at. So he was a massive influence on me. And from there, I kind of ran the ball for myself for maybe, I don't know, a year or two. Chris, my best friend Chris, has handled me over the years as well in progressing my strength for powerlifting. I've been handled by Michael Lane, who was a weightlifting coach of mine as well around the 2020 period. Paul from the bodybuilding physio. Yep. I'm about to butcher his last name. He's Greek and I always butcher it. So Paul, the bodybuilding physio, he was my first experience with training with a coach remotely. Yep. And I went to him for his knowledge with body mechanics, because he's a qualified physiotherapist who specializes in bodybuilding and working with a lot of strength athletes as well. I know he worked closely with the Oribs and Alex Simon at the time, so I thought he was going to be a really good learning someone to learn off. Yep. From there, I was handled by Maximus McCall. Maximus McCall has been my strongman coach to date since then. I think we would have been together for the last 2.5 years, maybe. Yeah, okay. Somewhere in there. So I've been handled by many coaches over the years, which I think has kind of added to my experience in strongman. I like having different mentors and different coaches, because I've learnt a lot from all of them along the way. The point here when it comes to strongman, powerlifting, strength training is there is no meta. Yeah. That's what I've learned. There is no one best way. Yeah. Or we would all do that. Yeah. You know what I mean? We would all do that thing. So, learning piece by piece from all of these coaches has been massive and has contributed in their own unique ways across and along this journey. Yeah.
I think that there is the kind of the pinnacle of learning about strength training as a coach. And like, I've had multiple coaches too. Granted, I've had a very conjugate bias, but I've been in the whole Western periodization world as well. I feel like I understand that quite well, and I use it like I use all of it, right? But every coach I've had, I've viewed it as a learning experience. It's not just like, tell me what to do. It's like, yes, I've wanted guidance and someone else to like pick at my faults, because I tend, as we all do, favour your good stuff. But viewing it as a learning experience and like not being tied to just one person forever, just going, okay, I'm going to learn from that person, and viewing them as mentors and coaches in a truer sense, other than just being a dictator or a programmer. It's if you want to be the best athlete, everyone's going to get to that point where they realise, hey, there's no one way. There's only the way that works for me, and it's like finding that. And it's often going to be the way you enjoy the most.
Absolutely.
And if you enjoy it, you're going to be willing to put more effort into it. So
definitely.
You're going to find, like, obviously anyone who's training has to do a bunch of stuff you don't want to do. But if you enjoy the system which you work in, you're going to get more out of it because you're enjoying it. So for you to kind of get to that point where you're like, oh, there's no one way, I think in that short period of time you've been actually coaching, whereas you've been learning for longer, you've reached a further point than possibly most do.
I think along with this just comes a level of maturity, and you have to have skin and years in the game to realize and recognize that you don't know everything about everything. And when you might look at other coaches or athletes' training methods, a lot of the time I hear lifters, athletes kind of tear other lifters or athletes down because of the methods that they have been prescribed. And a really good example of this happened to me back in the commercial gym that I worked at. Granted, for the most part, those kind of places are zoos, and you really have to work hard to, keep your blinkers on and pay attention and not pay attention to the nonsense that is carried out in some of those gyms. However, one of the members of the gym had taken a video of one of the lifters in the gym performing these super, super heavy, relatively heavy. The guy would have weighed generously 80 kilos soaking wet, and he would have had 200 something kilos on the barbell in a back squat, doing a super, super high box squat for reps. And old mates recorded him, put on his Instagram, have a look at this, ego lifter, dickhead, ha ha ha, crying emoji, laughing face. That guy that he was poking fun at was a Commonwealth Games athlete who was a long jumper.
Yeah.
And that specific exercise that had been chosen for him was obviously some kind of overloading exercise that he was using to potentiate some kind of triple extension that was going to be necessary for his jumping performance as a elite level athlete. Yeah. And this person just had zero scope of that. And that happens a lot, all the time. And I think always will. You know, even in recent history, and I was talking to my coach about this last week, who I think he cops some heat because some of his methods are kind of a bit outside of the box and weird and wacky, and in times, you know, will have me performing, you know, sprinting drills with water bags over my head, and, you know, will have me performing handstands and box jumps, and, you know, a lot of the kind of wider community will look at that and say, well, you know, how's that going to make you a better strong? Why aren't you spending more time deadlifting or you know, lifting stones? And where that may be true, you know, for that particular phase or moment in training, those specific exercises had a purpose. Yeah. You know, the overhead sprints, for example, was not so much about, you know, developing speed, strength, or speed in general. It was actually to instigate a response in my lower abdominals to correct my my pelvic mechanics, because I was kind of locked into this like anterior tilt. Yeah. And having that overhead position while I was running, I could it nailed it immediately. You know, it was a fantastic exercise for that moment. You know, the handstands have been terrific for making my shoulders feel amazing. Sure, I'm not going to do it if I'm leading up to Static Monsters World Championships and I've got a heavy log coming up in 2 weeks. Yeah. Probably not the time or place, but, you know, maybe 6 months out from that, right? I just need to feel like a normal person. Yeah. Fantastic exercise selection. So I think people, and that comes with the maturity, so people just need to recognize they don't know everything about everything. It is a scope. It's not a lens. And, you know, we do need to work with what works well for us as individuals.
Yeah. And like you said, there's not one way. Right? So there's multiple. Like you'd see someone doing an overhead plate carry in the gym, and you go, okay, I know that exercise. That's legitimate. But doing sprints with a water bag, no, that's not cool. It's like it's just a dynamic version of the same thing. Like, and if it's correcting an issue that is specific to you, then
play on.
Yeah,
play on.
Yeah, it's all footy. Is that what you
said? Yeah.
That's something, as someone who, like, I prescribe lots of weird shit, and I also get from my coach a ton of weird shit, and I cop endless like friendly ribbing for it in the gym, which is like I'm all down for that. But outside, like, there's a lot of that going on where it's like you don't know the context of that person. So why are you saying it? Actually, I just saw one of my friends from America, Ben Pauly, who's an awesome coach and multiply powerlifter over there, who just posted tonight about last night actually about this this culture of kind of tearing everyone down, like you were just talking about, and that he had someone reach out to him who was dissatisfied with their coach because of lack of communication or lack of poor exercise selection, and he was like, I could have taken that client. They wanted to come to me, but instead I said, well, let's figure out how to talk to your coach and figure out what's the best approach from here, and you can get a better outcome because that coach knows you better than I, so you're going to take a step back with me to learn all this new stuff. But there's a whole culture around just like, no, your coach is shit because they don't know what they're doing, or that's not what I would do, therefore it's a bad decision. So as someone who, like, I've seen the stuff that you give your guys, I've seen the stuff that you do, so there's a lot of out of the box stuff. It's hard to kind of deal with because if people don't see it, they're like, oh,
I think
what is this weird?
If more people spent more time worrying about their own training, and less about what other people are doing in their training, maybe they would have a bigger trophy cabinet.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So,
well, you can't argue with the results if you're doing some weird shit. It's like, well, third strongest man over here So
There was only one of those trophies given away. You know what I mean?
yeah, it's like if it works, it works. Like who cares if it looks weird? Like it's obviously there's so many exercises that we can do. We don't have to do this set standard group of exercises that are socially acceptable. It's like that might be the one that you can finally feel your glutes engage. Like great, let's use that. Like you can teach someone how to use their glutes all you want, but if they're not getting it and you chuck a band around their knees and suddenly they can feel their glutes in their squats, like, okay, win. That was an easy win. Why do we have to tear that down?
Totally.
It's silly.
Why do we have to reinvent the wheel when such low-hanging fruits are available for us to pick?
Yeah. It's like there's easy tools sometimes just to get someone to do the thing that you want them to do that they can't quite figure out. You're like, hey, let's just try this. And they're like, oh, is that what you mean? You're like, yeah, cool. We just nailed that in 2 minutes.
Yep.
Whereas I could have explained to you the science and the mechanisms and the biomechanics of the whole thing and bored the shit out of you in the process. You would have understood it. You still can't do it. So what's the point?
Seriously.
So when you're approaching, given that you've trained conjugate, you've trained in these kind of linear models and stuff, like how do you look at periodization now as a coach?
It is, when coming to programming prescription, it's so person dependent.
Yeah.
I think there's still methods which I will implement at times, such as methods that I've learnt from conjugate styles of training, but there are always principles that I abide by, and those principles, they can include managing volume prescriptions correctly, managing loading prescriptions correctly, implementing progressive overloading prescriptions correctly. There's always these kind of prescriptions that need to be abided by, but it's so context dependent. So it really comes down to the needs of the athlete and when we are going, where we are going, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. I think there is guiding principles, but then the path is different. There's the old Chinese proverb that has stuck with me since a teenager, because my parents had like one of those little flip calendars. It had some quote, usually some like positive motivational quote every single day for the whole year, and she still has those calendars. She gets them every year. She's had them every year since I was.
I love it.
And there's one that stuck with me, this old proverb, there's many paths to the top of the mountain, but the view's always the same. And I think strength training falls into that, because it's like, we're all just trying to get strong. There's so many ways we can do it.
Totally.
So how you do it and how you do it, even though you're both my clients, might be completely different. You might not take to that type of training. Like it might just not function well with your personality. You need to know that it's going up in a very set standard way. You get to touch the implements that you're using often and do it in a kind of comp context. Whereas other people might just be like, all right, I'm happy to just build the base and every now and then we'll do what we do. Or they're happy to like jump all over the place and max out every now and then and do like all these weird exercises. Some people just get better results because they're bought in mentally. Speaking of personalities and training, you recently were on an ABC segment talking about using anger and aggression in a sports performance context. How did that come about, firstly? And could you elaborate more on that?
So I was put forward from one of the members who holds influence and, I suppose, status in the strongman community, who was approached by the ABC. They were looking for exactly what you mentioned. They were doing a documentary on how anger can be used in a positive way to impact the sports performance. I was put forward simply because I can communicate that effectively. How that documentary wouldn't play out would look like, well, I just fucking flip the switch and send it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's strongman, not smart man, but it still pays to be able to articulate a decent sentence. But no, it was a really, really cool experience. It was actually quite funny. the ABC team, they came into the gym for a day, and we did a bunch of filming, and they were kind of filling me in on what it was about and where it was going to go. And I believe, I actually still haven't watched it yet. It's like out and it's live, and people have given me feedback, and they've seen it, whatever. I actually haven't watched it back. I need to do that. I really should do that. The reason being, I just don't have a telly at home. I'm not one of these like silver, tinfoil hat wearing people that believes in anything else other than I just don't have a telly. Yeah. But they came in and they were doing this segment, and they were taking different groups of people and kind of researching on how anger impacted these people differently. And so there was Strongman, and I don't remember one of the subjects, but the other subject was toddlers. And I thought, yeah, well, in many cases we can be very similar. But they came in, we did some shooting, we did some event work for them. I think we did the log press, monster dumbbell. I did a truck pull for them, and we did a car deadlift just for the sake of like content and footage and videography. However, they were asking me about how I used anger in a positive way. And I think this was best demonstrated at Australia's Strongest Man. Leading up to Australia's Strongest Man, I actually started a YouTube channel, and I started to document my strongman training and my strongman journey. It was actually in lead up to the January Australian Pro Show. Mm-hmm. And in one of these episodes that I put up, one of these training sessions that I put up, it was me with the log. I think it was my final heavy log session for the training cycle. We were peaking. This was a big contest, so we were running a proper peak, and I was coming into this one strong. Usually, when I'm training in the gym, I'm very relaxed. I don't typically lean into emotion. Get in. If country music's on, and if I'm chilling and I'm having fun, I'm having a chat with everyone in the gym, whatever. It's all friendly. But when we get into these really explosive periods of training, sometimes I need to flip the switch. And it happened naturally in one of these training sessions. I had last log. I think what was prescribed from memory was a top single or maybe a top double at 160 kilos on the clean and press. Mm-hmm. On my favorite log, it's my Fenrir log. It's a handcrafted timber log. It is gorgeous. My missus gifted it to me by surprise from Lindsay up on the mid-north coast, who crafted it. They worked alongside each other to have it done in secret to me, completely unbeknownst to myself. Handcrafted, shipped from Coffs Harbour to Sydney, delivered to the gym, and there for me to as a surprise in lead up to the World Loglifting Championships last October. Because the word was we were going to be lifting with a timber log, so my lovely missus wanted me to have my own timber log. Yeah. Amazing, like my pride and joy piece. This log. Like
there's a video of you walking in and finding it.
There is, yeah, yeah. She's amazing. She's one of a kind, Tashi girl. Anyway, there was my log, Big Mac inscribed on it. Kind of wanky, but whatever. That's my log. Yeah. It's 146 kilos empty, loaded up to 160 kilos. And man, I've cleaned this thing and I've just pushed it through genuinely felt like nothing. Like the crazy, the feeling when heavy weights just move so easily. Like it was, I took myself by surprise, and I've taken this log back down to the ground, and I'm, by this, it feels like there was smoke coming out of my ears and there was fire coming out of my nose, and I've cleaned this thing again, the easiest clean you've ever seen in your life, and I pushed this thing up into the air and locked it the fuck out, and that was it, prescribed for a top double. And I was like, fuck this, we are on here. So I pulled that thing back to the rack, and I've pushed it out again for 3 reps, and I brought it back to my chest, and I've pushed it out again. And I was so bewildered by how much strength I had in that moment. Man, I was surprised that I was just in complete shock that I'd done this for 4. That's a big set of log overhead. Yeah. And I just kind of intuitively put this thing down, and I've screamed in the Jesus fucking Christ. I've just, I was just having a moment. Yeah. And I was allowing anger to consume me in a super positive way. And my strength was through the roof. When the ABC crew came in, they said, Mel, what did the research? We watched that episode. Can you do that again? And, I thought, there's no way. You can't, I cannot just turn that on at any given moment.
Yeah.
That's a very special occasion kind of switch that I can flip. Anyway, we did the filming, and I tried to make it appear like I was flipping the switch, but it's not the same. There wasn't smoke coming out of my ears or fire coming out of my nose, but, I was yelling and swearing and carrying on and yada yada for the cameras. But, how that really looks in a competition setting was recently at Australia's Strongest Man. Some of the feedback that I got from friends, family, fans, strangers, random people that stopped me at the cafe the other day in my area and was like, "You're the guy from Australia Strong. You flipped the car. You jumped on top. You're the crazy guy." That competition was an expression of me allowing anger to take the reins. For some people, it works. Like myself, when I hit that switch and become a different self, I can use that. I can channel that chaotic rage into lifting crazy weight quickly. For some people, it doesn't work. And for some people, it doesn't work for two reasons. I think what some people do is monkey see, monkey do. They see Big Mac flipping the car and going crazy at the log, and they go, "I want to do that." And it might not be what's natural to them. And that it's fine. If it's not your thing, it's not your thing. I know some fantastic lifters that are just cool, calm, and collected. And when they go out to lift heavy weights, they do so with this like coldness about them. And that's what works for them. There's some people who will tap into this rage and they say they can't even focus on what they're doing because they just, they flip the switch, see red, and they shit the bed a little bit, and it might not impact them in a positive way. But over the years, this has just been what's worked for me. I think it's kind of how I started in Strongman, was this very kind of like macho, bravado, bang in the chest kind of way in gym sessions, and, kind of leaning into that a little bit more often than not. But it's very taxing. Like it's quite emotionally taxing to kind of just like be this angry guy for like an hour at a time, and just like cutting sick on some weights. I'm exhausted, dude. Like that's, it's hard work. So these days I kind of tap into it just only when I have to. And it means that when I do, there's a whole other gear. There's another gear there, boys. It was interesting. I actually got feedback from this weekend's competition just gone. Competed out at Penrith for my spot to re-qualify back to Australia's Strongest Man for next year. Rules are first and second re-qualify. Anyone else doesn't. I placed third, so that's footy. That's how it goes. The boys absolutely beat me on the day. Ryan Rullis and Bradman Houston, and they're not nobodies in their own right. But we competed against each other at Australia's Strongest Man this year. Ryan took fifth this year, but second last year. He's one of the top guys in strongman in the Australian scene right now. Bradman Houston, 21 years old, placed ninth. This desperately hungry young man in strongman who's he's fantastic strongman already. Give that guy 5 years and we're all going to be, we've got something serious to worry about here. But Rob, one of my friends, Rob Solway, he's under 105's Masters men's champion in the country. He said, "Where's Big Mac? Where's the crazy guy? Where's ASM Big Mac?" I felt like I didn't have to turn on that anger switch for that contest, not through any other reason apart from the fact that it wasn't the place. That kind of aggressive nature, it is entertaining. People love to see the big guy go insane, flipping cars and shit. I can understand. That's entertaining to watch. Did Big Mac need to lose his shit and fucking flip out in the middle of a gym in Penrith to compete against the boys at a local contest? Probably not. Probably not the time or place to do that. Fucking wish I did. If I did, I wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't have walked over the third place medal, and I would have been re-qualified. But again.
Do you get the option to qualify again?
Yeah. So this competition was the first leg of the series. So across this year, spread out between now and November, I think there's about 7 qualifiers, of which you can kind of sign up to anyone that you like. And every state effectively has their state title. So, this was the New South Wales leg. I think next is Western Australia and South Australia. And then we've got Queensland. And then we've got Victoria's Strongest Man. And then later in the year is Canberra's Strongest Man, effectively. And then Tassie's. I'm not sure about Northern Territory. I don't know if they have one this year. But that's kind of, there's one in every state. And the loose plan of right now is to compete later in November for a top 2 spot, maybe to contest with better events for myself personally. Who knows?
Or maybe flip the switch.
Maybe flip the fucking switch, baby. Yeah.
I think that's it's an interesting one to teach, because you see it a lot in any strength sport where you've got to perform very aggressively, like whether it's lifting a weight for 1 rep in powerlifting or it's doing deadlift for reps in strongman. There is a place you have to go, and it's different for everyone, like I said. But a lot of people see, we get aggressive. That's what you do, and they do shit the bed. They like, I'm that person. Like, I've had people, and like outside of the gym, I've dealt with significant stress and anxiety issues and anger problems. Heaps of that stuff. So I kind of thought when I started training, I'm going to be the angry guy. And I've tried to get myself revved up and I fuck up. I don't concentrate. I'm just
furious.
I'm too much in fight mode. I'm not thinking about what I have to do, and especially lifting in gear, I have to think. So I'm now down here.
Cool.
Like,
cool.
Internal switch is flipped, but I'm concentrating.
Cool.
And I'm calm, and that's what I've found I have to do. But that
great
actually has a positive outward benefit in that now I can control that stress, because you're stressed under a heavy weight. So you're like, okay, well, I've got to think and got to calm down. So that has a net benefit to the rest of my life, which is really useful. But you see a lot of people fall into that trap of, I've got to go. I've got to go into that fucking aggressive, lose my shit mode. It's like, no, well, maybe you don't.
Yeah.
So let's find out what works for you personally. And if it is that one, then great.
Good for you.
Yeah.
If it's not, that's also great.
You also need to learn to energy conserve, like you were talking about. Like, you can't be angry for an hour. You can't be angry for a whole comp.
No way.
You need to be angry. It's like, okay, you're up for the stone medley now. Like, I can't remember what, is it neural linguistic programming or something that Tony Robbins has talked about for 20, 30 years, is like having some sort of like physical, repeatable motion that you can do, is like, come on, and you do it a certain way every time, and that's, you've trained yourself to flip that switch. A good friend and mentor of mine taught me that in my second competition. I was really nervous for my second comp. So I was like, I don't know why. I wasn't competitive, nothing. I was really nervous. I'm like, I've got massive performance anxiety here. And he had worked with a sports psychologist who was involved with the Richmond Tigers in Victoria in the AFL. And that's something they'd taught, is this kind of how to flip your own switch mechanism. And since then, I'm like, that kind of made me, because I had people going, you need to get angry, you need to get into it, and fucking, I'm like, it doesn't feel like that's what I need to do. So having that switch and learning that, it can be individualized. It doesn't have to be what you do. It doesn't have to be what I do. Like, you find what works for you and turn it on.
Absolutely.
And like, a big part of, I think, coaching is like finding those psychological things that we can transfer to our clients. It's like, this could be useful for you. I don't think you're that person. This is like, let's try this. Try it in the gym. Or like, you don't need ammonia because you just to stop thinking.
Yep, totally. But from a coaching perspective, that's all well and good from an athlete's perspective. From a coaching perspective, it's imperative to understand that of your own athletes. I know which of my athletes will respond really well to, a back slap and a skull full of ammonia. And I know the others who, that you could do nothing worse than slap them on the back and make them skull fuck a bottle of ammonia. That's it's not going to suit them well at all. So understanding that there isn't a one size fits all approach is massive. There was a bloke that came to our gym a few weeks ago, and we were all training strongman together. It was actually one of the strongman Saturday sessions that I run, and he was trying to kind of coach one of the other athletes through his method of psyching up. And I just sat back and observed. But I knew what this athlete was capable of and how they wanted to kind of psych up, and this does not fit them at all. But I don't know, old mate kind of wasn't really understanding that isn't his approach, and also didn't have that maturity to understand that different strokes for different folks applies here.
Well, this is where you get into the weeds with kind of athletes coaching other athletes. It's like if you're if you're just going, oh, this is how I do it and it works really well for me, you should do it. It's like you probably don't have the emotional maturity to actually tell anyone else what to do. Like if you found what works for you, then great. But you have to have enough empathy to understand what motivates someone else.
Totally.
You can't just go, well, this is how I do it, you should do it like that. It's never going to work. So maybe leave it to the coaches, or like understand that people are different. Like you have conversations all the time where people just talk at you, and it's like, yeah, you're not probably the person that I'm going to take advice from, because you're not understanding what motivates me, and that's like 100% what's going to get the best outcome for you as in a performance context. Is like what actually motivates you to do this? Like, is it to be the big dick on standing on number one on the platform? Like, because then you might be that person that needs to be revved up and told you're in their ear going, what are you here for? Let's show them what you're made of, blah, 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 all that kind of shit. Or you might just be like me and some of my clients particularly. It's like, you know what to do. Let's go out there and do it. You're perfectly strong enough to do this. Just remember to do this, this, and this.
You might have to just remind of a couple of cues.
Yeah.
And off you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, we've had these conversations like where you're jokingly like, I'm not much of a backslapper. If people ask me to backslap them, I will, but like I'm not going out there to do it.
Of course.
Whereas like Leroy, for example, in the gym, he is notorious for being the best backslapper in the Hunter Valley. Like if you get one of his backslaps, that handprint's staying for...
Noted.
Yeah.
I'm still after the best backslap.
Oh, yeah. The best part is it's not actually in your back. He hits you in the cervical spine.
Oh, yeah.
He'll grab you by the shoulder and hit you in the back of the neck. And they're good ones.
Joe actually gave me an ambush on the weekend. I was going up for the farmer's carry, and I wasn't... I think it was the farmers. Wasn't expecting anything, and then out of nowhere, I just felt this huge hand just whack, and I thought, right, that's what we're doing.
And that's not a normal size hand.
Oh man, that guy's got mitts.
Yeah, fucking hell.
Yeah,
yeah. I've had people turn around and go, "If you hit me, I'll fucking punch you."
Yeah.
It's not going to motivate me. It's going to upset me.
Yep.
I've been that person where someone's gone and hit me and like force my face into ammonia. I'm like, no, this is not it. This is not for me. All right, well, to wrap things up, because we're coming up on 2 hours and your phone's going cranky. So someone wants your attention.
It does that.
It does that. It's the life of a coach.
That's what they do. They ring, and to be fair, that's probably the missus. I've flicked it to do not disturb, so she's the only one that comes through. So she probably
fair enough.
Yeah, probably wants me for something.
Fair enough. But I think we've covered a very good gamut of topics today, and I thank you very much for coming up. But so to finish up, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you and see what you do and how you do it, and where's your ats and your YouTube and what are all those details?
Yeah. Best way to get to me is Instagram. These days I think it's the necessary evil of all coaches and businesses. Macauley Tinker Strongman on Instagram. And go from there. If you're interested in seeing what I was doing on YouTube, I'm sure if you punch in Macauley Tinker Strongman, you'll find me sooner or later. So get in touch if you need anything. Yep.
All those details, as always, will be in the show notes for everyone to get in contact with you and see, where your gym is and all that sort of stuff. I'll put all that there.
Cool.
Thanks for coming on. I appreciate you as a guest, as a very well-spoken, articulate strongman, unlike all the rest of you. Jokes. And we love giving the strongman shit in our gym. I'm sure it's every gym that there's powerlifters and strongman. They all like,
oh yeah,
no, you're the dumb ones. And you're the dumb ones.
Yeah.
We're all dumb.
Yeah.
Let's just embrace our
Agreed.
stupidity. Yeah. But I think that you are an extremely positive and very likable person. Like you have the face that people are drawn to, I think. So I always like to say, what motivates me to bring people on, but I think people who exude a kind of positive attitude and wanting everyone around them to be better are the people that I'm drawn to. So you are very much one of those people. So thank you for being that. And thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And we'll sit down another time and talk some shit.
I'd love that.
I appreciate the coffee too.
Of course.
Josie's Coffee, two locations in Newcastle. Great coffee. Not sponsored, but great coffee. Thanks for joining us again, and sorry that there's been a bit of a break. As everyone on the East Coast knows, we're all getting smashed with the flu and pneumonia and all sorts of shit, so my whole household has been demolished for 5 weeks. So that's why we're a bit behind on this one, but I think this one was worth the wait. So thanks for tuning in. Make sure you check out all the sponsors and all of Macaulay's details in the show notes, and we'll see you again soon.